The summer sun painted golden streaks across the crystal-clear water of the luxury condo's swimming pool. It was one of those perfect Sunday afternoons where time seemed to slow down and the world felt at peace. The kind of day that made you forget about deadlines, meetings, and the usual stress of city life. Our story's main character, a talented software engineer in his mid-30s, had just achieved one of his biggest life goals, buying his dream home in this upscale community. After years of hard work, countless late nights coding, and smart savings, he'd finally done it. He purchased one of the most expensive units in the building, a beautiful corner apartment with a view of both the city skyline and the mountains. Having spent the last 2 weeks unpacking boxes and setting up his new home, he decided it was finally time to enjoy one of the perks he'd been looking forward to most, the private pool. He'd caught glimpses of it during his move-in, its sparkling water and peaceful atmosphere calling to him, but there had been no time until now to properly enjoy it. The afternoon was perfect for swimming. A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of nearby flowering trees, and the pool area was surprisingly quiet. Most residents were either away for the weekend or enjoying indoor activities, leaving him to savor this peaceful moment alone. He walked across the warm concrete of the pool deck, his new pool access card hanging from the lanyard around his neck. The water looked inviting, its surface gleaming like polished glass under the bright afternoon sun. He'd already changed into his swimming shorts and brought along a few essentials: a fluffy towel, his favorite book about tech startups, and a bottle of cold water. Setting his things down on one of the pristine lounge chairs, he couldn't help but smile. This was exactly the kind of life he'd worked so hard to achieve. A place where he could relax and feel at home, a community where he could build a future. He'd already met some of his neighbors during the move-in, and most had been welcoming, offering helpful tips about the best local restaurants and shortcuts to avoid traffic. The first touch of water against his toes sent a refreshing chill up his spine. He eased himself in slowly, enjoying every sensation. The pool was maintained at the perfect temperature, cool enough to be refreshing but warm enough to be comfortable. As he pushed off from the pool wall and began to float on his back, his eyes traced the patterns of wispy clouds drifting across the bright blue sky. In these peaceful moments, he reflected on his journey. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, he'd always dreamed of something more. Not just the material things, but the sense of achievement, of knowing he'd earned his place in the world through dedication and hard work. Now, floating in his own community pool, he felt that sense of accomplishment wash over him. Little did he know that this tranquil afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn. As he floated peacefully, someone was watching from the pool area entrance, someone who would challenge his right to be there, someone who would turn this peaceful Sunday into an unforgettable incident that would spark important conversations about prejudice and belonging in residential communities. The gentle lapping of water against the pool's edges and the distant sound of city traffic created a soothing backdrop to his relaxation. He closed his eyes, feeling completely at peace, unaware that in just a few minutes, his presence in this private pool would trigger a confrontation that would not only change his life, but would also become a catalyst for significant changes in the community. Time seemed to stand still in these last moments of peace. The sun continued to warm his face, the water gently cradled his body, and the world felt perfectly aligned. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet moment before an incident that would soon make headlines and spark important discussions about belonging, prejudice, and the right to feel at home in one's own community. The peaceful atmosphere at the pool was shattered by the sharp click of heels against concrete. A woman in her mid-40s, dressed in designer athleisure wear and clutching her phone like a weapon, marched onto the pool deck. Her face wore the kind of expression that suggested she appointed herself guardian of everything within her sight. She'd lived in the building for 5 years and prided herself on knowing every resident by face, if not by name. As the self-appointed chair of the Community Watch Committee, a position that existed only in her mind, she took it upon herself to question anyone she didn't recognize. Her previous targets had mostly been delivery people and maintenance workers, but today she'd set her sights on someone new. The sound of her approach broke through the tranquil afternoon air. Our software engineer opened his eyes, the peaceful moment instantly evaporating as he noticed her stern expression. He'd seen that look before, the mix of suspicion and assumed authority that some people wore like a badge of honor. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone that wasn't really excusing anything. "I need to see your pool access card immediately." She stood at the pool's edge, her shadow falling across the water like a dark cloud on a sunny day. Her phone was already raised, its camera lens glinting in the sunlight. The whole scene might have been almost funny if it wasn't so uncomfortable. Here was a person enjoying a quiet afternoon in their own community pool, being confronted like an intruder. The woman's hands were shaking slightly, though whether from nervousness or excitement was hard to tell. She'd already positioned herself between the pool and the exit, as if to prevent any attempt at escape. "I don't recognize you," she continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "And I know everyone who lives in this building." She emphasized the word everyone as if her personal knowledge was more reliable than the building's official resident records. Other residents enjoying their Sunday afternoon began to take notice. A couple reading books by the hot tub looked up from their novels. An older gentleman getting ready to do his daily laps paused in his stretching routine. The atmosphere around the pool shifted from peaceful weekend relaxation to uncomfortable tension. The woman's behavior grew more aggressive with each passing second of silence. She began listing off building policies, most of which she was making up on the spot. All residents must be pre-approved for pool access, she declared, despite this not being true. And all guests must be accompanied by a resident, she added, gesturing at the empty chairs around the pool as if the absence of another person was proof of wrongdoing. Our software engineer remained calm in the water, though his heart was racing. He'd heard stories about situations like this, but had hoped he wouldn't experience one in his own home. The pool water that had felt so welcoming just moments ago now felt like it was growing colder by the second. The woman's phone was still recording, its camera trained on him like a surveillance device. She seemed to be narrating for her video now, speaking in that particular tone people use when they think they're documenting something important. "It's 3:45 p.m. on Sunday, and we have an unauthorized individual refusing to show proper identification." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone watching. The very features that made this community desirable, its exclusivity, its security, its careful screening of residents, were being wielded as weapons against someone who had every right to be there. The woman's absolute certainty in her wrongness would have been almost comical if it wasn't so unsettling. More residents were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Some stood awkwardly at the edges of the scene, unsure whether to intervene. Others whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between the woman and the man in the pool. The peaceful Sunday afternoon had transformed into an uncomfortable spectacle that would soon become much more than just a poolside disagreement. Taking a deep breath, our software engineer moved toward the pool's edge, maintaining his composure despite the increasingly tense situation. The cool water still dripped from his shoulders as he reached for his pool access card, which had been hanging from the lanyard around his neck the entire time. "Ma'am," he said calmly, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I actually live here. I just moved in 2 weeks ago, and this is my access card." He held up the card, its official building logo clearly visible in the sunlight. The woman's expression flickered for just a moment, but her stance didn't change. "Anyone could have gotten that card," she snapped back, her phone still recording every moment. "I need to see your lease agreement or proof of residence right now." Her voice had taken on that particular tone that people use when they're trying to mask their uncertainty with authority. The gathered crowd had grown larger. A young couple who had helped him move in some furniture stood near the pool gate, their faces showing a mix of concern and embarrassment for their community. An elderly resident who had welcomed him with homemade cookies during his first week looked on with disapproval, though it was clearly directed at the confrontational woman, not at him. "I'd be happy to show you my documents," he replied, his voice remaining remarkably calm. "They're in my apartment, which I own, not lease. Would you like to explain why you're recording me without my consent?" He gestured toward her phone, which was still pointed directly at him. The woman's response was to raise her voice even louder, as if volume could make her right. "This is a private community. I'm protecting our residents. I'm going to call security, and then we'll see who really belongs here." Her hands were shaking now, causing the phone to wobble as she continued recording. Several residents had begun to murmur among themselves. "That's the guy who bought Unit 1505, one whispered to another. The corner penthouse, came the response. Yes, I saw him at the homeowners meeting last week. The software engineer slowly climbed out of the pool, water cascading off him as he reached for his towel. His movements were deliberate and calm, a sharp contrast to the woman's increasingly agitated state. By all means, he said, wrapping the towel around his shoulders, please call security. In fact, I'll call them myself. He walked over to his chair where his own phone lay. The woman's eyes widened as he picked it up, perhaps realizing the situation wasn't going exactly as she planned. Instead of calling security, though, he opened his phone's camera and began his own recording. Since we're documenting things, he said quietly, I think it's important to have both sides of the story. His voice was steady, but there was a slight tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from the effort of maintaining his composure in the face of such blatant prejudice. The atmosphere around the pool had become electrically charged. Other residents were now pulling out their phones, some recording, others apparently texting building management. The woman's face had taken on a reddish hue, but she stood her ground, though her phone had lowered slightly. I have every right to question suspicious people in our community, she insisted, but her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. The word suspicious hung in the air like a heavy cloud, its implications clear to everyone present. Just then, the young couple who had helped him move in stepped forward. He's our neighbor, the husband said firmly. We helped him move in his furniture 2 weeks ago. He owns the corner unit. His wife nodded in agreement, adding, we were just talking about having him over for dinner next week. The support from his neighbors seemed to fuel our software engineer's resolve. He turned to address the growing crowd, speaking clearly and calmly. I bought my home here because I believed this was a welcoming community. I work in tech, I serve on 2 charitable boards, and yes, I can afford to live here. But more importantly, I have every right to enjoy this pool without being harassed or filmed without my consent. The truth of his words seemed to ripple through the crowd. More residents were stepping forward now, some introducing themselves, others apologizing for not speaking up sooner. The woman with the phone stood frozen, her camera still recording, but her certainty visibly crumbling as the situation spun further and further out of her control. The afternoon sun continued to beat down on the pool deck as our software engineer made a decision that would change everything. Still holding his phone steady, he started a live stream on his social media account. I think it's important to share what's happening here, he said clearly into the camera. This is what it looks like when someone questions your right to exist in your own home. Within minutes, viewers began joining the live stream. The numbers ticked up rapidly, 50, 100, 500, 1,000. Comments started flooding in, many from other tech professionals and homeowners who had experienced similar situations. The woman's face paled as she realized this confrontation was no longer just a local incident. Let me show you something interesting, he said to both his live audience and the gathered residents. Walking calmly to his pool chair, he picked up his leather portfolio. The woman's phone wavered as he pulled out several official-looking documents. This is my deed to Unit 1505, he explained, holding up the paper so both cameras could see it clearly. And this is my property tax statement. And here's my pool access agreement, signed by building management. The growing crowd of residents murmured in recognition. Unit 1505 was well known in the building. It was the corner penthouse that had made headlines in local real estate news for its record-breaking sale price just a month ago. Several people nodded in recognition, remembering the buzz about the unit's sale. I'm a software engineer, he continued, his voice steady and clear. I've designed systems used by millions of people. I serve on the board of 2 local charitable organizations. I bought this unit because I believed this was a community that valued people for their character, not their appearance. More residents were arriving at the pool area now, drawn by the commotion and the growing crowd. An older gentleman stepped forward, recognition dawning on his face. Wait a minute, he said. Weren't you at the charity gala last month? The one for the children's hospital? Yes, sir, our engineer replied. I helped organize the tech auction that raised over $100,000 for the new pediatric wing. This revelation sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. The woman's phone had dropped to her side, though it was still recording. The livestream numbers continued to climb. 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. Comments poured in from across the country, sharing similar stories and offering support. Several viewers recognized him from tech conferences and charity events, posting links to his professional achievements and community work. A couple who lived on the same floor as his penthouse stepped forward. "We had dinner with him last week," the wife said firmly. "He's already done more for this community in 2 weeks than some people have done in years." She shot a pointed look at the woman with the phone. The woman's face had turned from pale to red, but she tried one last time to maintain her position. "I'm just trying to protect our community," she stammered, but her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No," our engineer said quietly but firmly, "you're trying to protect your assumptions about who belongs here. Let me show you something else." He pulled up the building's community app on his phone, displaying his profile as a resident. "I'm not just verified by management. I'm already signed up to host the next tech workshop for the building's teenagers, teaching them coding basics for free." This revelation caused another stir among the residents. Many had seen the workshop announcement and had already signed their kids up, not knowing the instructor was their new neighbor. The woman's phone finally lowered completely as the reality of her mistake became undeniable. Through his live stream, viewers could see the entire scene unfold: the impressive pool area of the luxury building, the gathered residents, and most importantly, the stark contrast between the baseless accusations and the truth about their target. Comments continued pouring in, many from other professionals sharing their own experiences with similar prejudices. "I think," he said, addressing both his live audience and the woman, "that it's time we had a real conversation about what belonging means in our communities. It's not about what someone looks like or whether one person recognizes them. It's about the right to feel safe and respected in your own home." The crowd had grown quiet, absorbing his words. Even those who had initially stayed silent were now nodding in agreement. The woman's phone had disappeared into her pocket, but our engineer's live stream continued, documenting this moment of transformation in their community. The clicking of dress shoes against the pool deck's concrete surface cut through the tense atmosphere. The building manager, still in her Sunday business attire, strode purposefully toward the gathering. Her expression was a mixture of concern and determination as she took in the scene before her. Dozens of residents with phones out, a live stream in progress, and a confrontation that had clearly gotten out of hand. "I came as soon as I got the calls," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority that comes from actually having it, rather than just assuming it. She'd been the property manager for over a decade, handling everything from minor maintenance issues to major renovations. But this situation was different, and everyone could sense it. The manager's eyes immediately fell on our software engineer, recognition lighting up her face. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "I see you're finally getting a chance to enjoy our pool facilities." She turned to address the crowd, but particularly the woman who had started the confrontation. "This gentleman purchased Unit 1505 last month. I personally handled his paperwork and building orientation." The woman with the phone shifted uncomfortably, her earlier confidence deflating like a balloon with a slow leak. "I was just trying to maintain security," she mumbled, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "Let me be very clear," the manager continued, her voice firm but professional. "Our security protocols do not include residents confronting or filming other residents without consent. Every resident here has gone through proper verification processes before receiving their access cards and moving in." The livestream counter had now reached over 50,000 viewers, all witnessing this turning point in real time. Comments continued to flood in, many praising the manager's professional handling of the situation. "I've been managing luxury properties for 15 years, she continued, addressing both the physical crowd and the virtual audience. "What makes a community truly luxurious isn't just the amenities or the price tag, it's how we treat each other. Every resident here deserves to feel safe and welcomed in their own home." Our engineer nodded appreciatively. "Thank you," he said. "I chose this building not just for the beautiful apartment, but because during my initial tours, everyone I met seemed so welcoming." He paused, looking meaningfully at the woman who had confronted him. "Well, almost everyone." The manager pulled out her tablet, quickly pulling up relevant documents. "For those who haven't met our new neighbor yet, he's not just a resident. He's already volunteered to lead our upcoming youth technology program. He's also made a significant donation to our building's annual charity drive. This revelation sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. Several parents in the audience perked up at the mention of the technology program, which had been advertised in the building's newsletter just days before. The woman who had started the confrontation now looked like she wanted to disappear into the pool deck's concrete. Her phone had long since been put away, but the damage was done. The live stream had captured everything, and the internet never forgets. "I think," the manager said, addressing the woman directly, "we need to have a serious discussion about appropriate behavior in our community. My office, first thing tomorrow morning." Her tone left no room for argument. Some residents had begun to drift away, but many stayed, now approaching our engineer to introduce themselves properly. Parents asked about the technology program, tech enthusiasts wanted to discuss his work, and others simply wanted to apologize for not speaking up sooner. The building manager turned to address the remaining crowd. "I'm calling an emergency community meeting for tomorrow evening. We clearly need to discuss our community guidelines and ensure everyone understands what it means to be part of this community." Her words carried both authority and disappointment, not just in one person's actions, but in the fact that such a meeting was necessary at all. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pool deck as the situation finally began to de-escalate. The woman who had started it all slipped away quietly, but not before the manager reminded her about their meeting the next morning. The live stream continued to gather viewers, now becoming part of a larger conversation about community, belonging, and the right to feel safe in one's own home. Through it all, our engineer maintained his composure, turning what could have been just another unfortunate incident into a moment of education and community growth. The pool water that had seemed so inviting earlier now rippled with the weight of everything that had transpired, reflecting the golden sunset and the faces of a community forever changed by one Sunday afternoon's events. By Monday morning, the pool incident had spread far beyond the confines of the luxury condo building. The live stream recording had racked up millions of views overnight, with news outlets picking up the story and social media buzzing with discussions about racial profiling in residential spaces. The building's lobby was unusually busy that morning. Residents who normally rushed past each other with quick nods were now stopping to talk, sharing their perspectives on what had happened. The usual morning coffee group in the resident lounge had doubled in size, with people gathering to discuss the previous day's events. "Did you see how calm he stayed through the whole thing?" one resident asked, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "I don't know if I could have handled it with such grace." Others nodded in agreement, many admitting they should have spoken up sooner when they saw what was happening. The building's online resident forum was flooded with messages. Some shared their own experiences with prejudice, while others proposed ideas for making the community more welcoming. The tech professionals in the building were particularly vocal, many having faced similar situations in their own careers. "My kids are so excited about his coding class," one mother posted. "They can't believe their teacher is the same person from the viral video. He's turning this whole thing into a lesson about resilience and dignity." The post quickly filled with responses from other parents whose children were enrolled in the upcoming program. By midday, the story had caught the attention of several civil rights organizations. Their social media accounts shared the video, praising the software engineer's composed response while highlighting the broader issues it represented. Local tech companies reached out, offering to partner with the building's new youth technology program. The emergency community meeting scheduled for that evening had to be moved from the usual conference room to the grand ballroom to accommodate the unprecedented number of residents wanting to attend. People who had lived in the building for years but barely knew their neighbors were now introducing themselves, sharing stories, and discussing ways to prevent similar incidents. Our software engineer's inbox was overflowing with messages of support. Tech industry leaders praised his handling of the situation, with several offering to contribute resources to expand his youth coding initiative. Local schools reached out, hoping to establish similar programs in their communities. The building's social media accounts, usually quiet except for maintenance announcements, were now trending. The property management company had posted a strong statement condemning discrimination and announcing immediate changes to community policies. The post gained traction as other residential communities began sharing their own commitments to fostering inclusive environments. Throughout the day, residents stopped by the management office to voice their concerns and suggestions. Many shared stories of subtle discriminations they'd witnessed or experienced but had been hesitant to report. The building manager, true to her word, was documenting everything, preparing for comprehensive policy changes. "We need a complete overhaul of our community guidelines," one resident suggested during an impromptu gathering in the lobby. "It's not enough to just say we're inclusive, we need to actively work at it." Others chimed in with practical suggestions, from diversity training for committee members to regular community events designed to help neighbors actually get to know each other. The woman from the pool incident had her meeting with management that morning, though she left quickly through a side door, avoiding the crowded lobby. Word spread that she had been removed from her self-appointed community watch position, which, as everyone now knew, had never been official in the first place. Local news vans parked outside the building, hoping to catch interviews with residents. Many stopped to share their thoughts, expressing both regret about the incident and hope for positive changes. The story was no longer just about one confrontation at a pool. It had become a catalyst for examining how communities handle diversity and inclusion. By evening, several residents had organized an impromptu poolside gathering, deliberately choosing the scene of the previous day's incident. They'd brought snacks and drinks, creating an atmosphere of community and healing. Our software engineer attended briefly, touched by the gesture, but also aware that the real work of creating lasting change was just beginning. The incident had sparked something larger than anyone expected. What started as one person's prejudice had evolved into a movement within the community, with residents actively working to ensure their luxury building truly lived up to its premium status, not just in its amenities, but in how it treated all its residents. In the weeks following the pool incident, the luxury condo building transformed in ways nobody had expected. The emergency community meeting had sparked real change, turning what could have been just another viral moment into lasting improvements for everyone. The building's grand ballroom was packed that first evening, with every seat taken and people standing along the walls. Our software engineer sat in the front row, his presence a reminder of why they were all there. The building manager opened the meeting with a powerful statement: "What happened at our pool wasn't just about one incident or one person. It's about who we want to be as a community." The changes started small but grew quickly. The old Community Watch program was completely disbanded and replaced with a properly trained resident welcome committee. New residents now received personal welcome visits from their floor representatives, complete with information packages and genuine introductions to their neighbors. "I've lived here for 3 years," one resident shared during a community feedback session, "and I've never felt more connected to my neighbors than I do now." Others nodded in agreement. The building's common areas, once merely places people passed through, had become genuine gathering spaces. The youth technology program, led by our software engineer, became the building's crown jewel. Every Saturday morning, the community room transformed into a coding academy. Kids from different backgrounds sat side by side, learning to create apps and websites. Parents often stayed to watch, turning the sessions into impromptu community gatherings. "My daughter used to play video games all day," one parent shared during a coffee break. "Now she's building them. She says she wants to be a software engineer too." The proud smile on their face reflected the ripple effect of positive change throughout the community. The woman from the pool incident had moved out quietly a month later, but her departure wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. The building's management company had implemented mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff and resident committee members. More importantly, they created clear guidelines for handling community concerns, with an emphasis on respect and proper channels of communication. The building's social media presence, once dormant, now showcased the community's transformation. Regular posts highlighted resident achievements, community events, and the successful youth tech program. Other luxury buildings in the city began reaching out, asking for advice on implementing similar changes in their own communities. 3 months after the incident, the local news returned, not to revisit the controversy, but to cover the success of the youth technology program. The reporter interviewed several young participants, their eyes shining as they demonstrated their coding projects. Our software engineer stood in the background, letting his students take the spotlight. "We're not just teaching kids to code," He explained when asked about the program's impact. "We're teaching them that they belong anywhere their talents and hard work can take them." The story went viral again, but this time for all the right reasons. The building's quarterly newsletter now featured a regular column called Community Voices, where residents shared their experiences and perspectives. The first issue after the incident had so many submissions they had to expand it to several pages. People who had lived as strangers were now sharing their stories, their cultures, and their dreams for the community. The pool area, once the site of confrontation, had become a symbol of community unity. Regular poolside gatherings brought residents together for everything from morning coffee to evening social hours. New signs posted around the amenities areas didn't just list rules, they emphasized community values of respect, inclusion, and belonging. A year after the incident, during the building's annual Resident Appreciation Day, our software engineer was honored with a Community Service Award. Standing at the podium, he reflected on how a moment of prejudice had led to profound change. What happened that day at the pool could have torn us apart. Instead, it brought us together and made us better. The story of the pool incident continued to circulate on social media, but now it was accompanied by updates about the positive changes it had sparked. Other residential communities across the country began using it as a case study in how to handle discrimination and build genuine community connections. Sometimes, our engineer often said during community meetings, it takes an uncomfortable moment to wake us up and show us what needs to change. The nodding heads and warm smiles around the room showed how far they'd come from that tense Sunday afternoon by the pool. The building had become more than just a luxury residence. It was now a true community where people looked out for each other, celebrated differences, and worked together to create a welcoming home for everyone. The incident that could have defined them by their worst moment instead inspired them to show their best.